The Dozier School operated as a state-run reform school in Marianna, Florida. Behind its gates, thousands of children, disproportionately Black, were beaten, raped, and tortured. Jerry Cooper, who was sent to Dozier at 16, described being beaten until he passed out. Another boy counted 135 lashes. This is the state using pain to enforce obedience, to erase resistance, and to instill fear so deep it lasts a lifetime. The Florida Dozier School for Boys, Unmasking White Terror, Carceral Capitalism, and the Abolitionist Struggle for Black Liberation. From 1900s to 2011, the Florida School for Boys, more commonly known as the Dozier School, operated as a state-run reform school in Marianna, Florida. But reform was never the goal. Behind its gates, thousands of children, disproportionately Black, were beaten, raped, and tortured, forced into labor, and in many cases, killed. Under the guise of juvenile rehabilitation, the state created a carceral institution where white men could legally and systematically brutalize Black children. Boys were often sent there for minor infractions. So, for example, if they were skipping school, running away from home, or being, quote, unruly. None of these were real infractions. They were all just, things that were made up to criminalize Black children. But once inside the school, they were subjected to a reign of racial terror sanctioned by the state of Florida. Now, this wasn't a school, it was a prison camp for children. And for over a century, the state denied, covered up, and enabled that violence. Dozier is not an isolated tragedy, it's a microcosm of the United States itself, a nation where white power builds institutions not to protect children, but to disappear them.
In a Florida Panhandle graveyard, they discovered 50 unmarked graves at the Dozier School for Boys, a state institution for wayward children shut down in 2011.
I want you to imagine a place where the laughter of children is replaced by the sound of leather straps cracking against flesh. Imagine a school with more graves than playgrounds, where the state's promise of reform is a lie, an instrument of imperialist violence, colonial discipline, and racial terror. This is not fiction. This is the Florida Dozier School for Boys. The birth of a carceral machine, colonial roots, and segregated violence. The Dozier School for Boys was founded in 1900 in Marianna, Florida, under a 1987 act of the state legislature. From its inception, it was a tool of white supremacist social control, and its structure was segregated. Black boys and white boys were kept apart, and Black boys were predominantly subject to state violence. Segregation here wasn't just about separate buildings. It's about the state deciding who was disposable, who could be broken, and who could be erased. The school was overseen by state-appointed commissioners, later replaced by the governor and his cabinet, consolidating power in the hands of the state. This is the logic of empire, to centralize authority, to strip the community of autonomy, and to criminalize children, especially Black children, for the, quote, crime of existing outside the white capitalist order.
After allegations of abuse and even suspicious deaths, several of our viewers reached out to us after we were allowed on Dozier property, and our Carson Chambers met with one of them today. Carson?
Linda, Captain Bill Nelson was just a kid when he was sent away to Dozier, but his story is enough to make even adults cry.
In 1903, just 3 years after opening, inspectors found children kept in leg irons. Imagine children as young as 8 or 5 shackled like prisoners of war. This is direct colonial punishment and a direct descendant of the plantation chain gang.
Identification through DNA.
USF scientists are preparing for a massive exhumation. They've discovered nearly 50 unmarked graves in the woods.
We know some of the children buried here were unnamed.
The state shut down the institution for wayward boys in 2011 after allegations of abuse and suspicious deaths.
Now let's discuss the White House, which was a ritualized torture disguised as state discipline. So at the heart of Dozier's terror was the, quote, White House, which was a small, unassuming building where boys were taken for beatings so severe, survivors say the sound of the strap echoed through concrete walls. These were not spankings, they were ritualized acts of torture designed to break the spirits and bodies of people.
weeks.
I was taken out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I received 135 lashes.
Now, workers preparing to clean up a nearby fuel storage site have made a chilling discovery, evidence of more potential graves. The workers found 27 anomalies on the parcel.
Jerry Cooper, who was sent to Dozier at 16, described being beaten until he passed out. Another boy counted 135 lashes. This is the state using pain to enforce obedience, to erase resistance, and to instill fear so deep it lasts a lifetime. The White House boys, as survivors now call themselves, have spent decades fighting to have their stories believed. Black boys, state violence, and the logic of racial terror. Black boys suffered the most. Dozier was a site of anti-Black violence where the carceral state's hatred of Black autonomy was made flesh. Many Black boys were sent to Dozier for crimes like truancy, running away, or simply being labeled incurable. That's a direct quote. And of course, these were not crimes. They were just acts of survival in a world that criminalized Black existence. The institution functioned as a labor camp, essentially. Black boys were forced to work, often in the fields, echoing the forced labor of slavery. They were beaten, raped, and sometimes killed. The state's records are incomplete, but it's now believed that nearly 100 boys died at Dozier between 1900 and 1973, many of them Black, and many buried in unmarked graves. Some died from gunshot wounds or blunt force trauma, and some simply disappeared. Their families never told what happened. This is the logic of settler colonialism, to erase the oppressed and to deny them even the dignity of burial and remembrance. Cemeteries instead of playgrounds, the forensic reckoning. For over a century, the state denied the scale of its crimes, but in 2012, a team led by forensic anthropologist Dr. Aaron Kimler began excavating the ground. Using ground-penetrating radar, they found at least 55 unmarked graves, almost twice the number the state had ever acknowledged. Artifacts like belt buckles, buttons, and a marble in a boy's pocket were found with the remains, each item a testament to a stolen childhood. The official cemetery had only 13 marked graves, and the rest were hidden, erased, and denied. Why? Because the state wanted to avoid accountability, to protect itself from civil liability, and to keep the machinery of carceral violence running without interruption. DNA testing and isotope analysis have helped identify some of the boys, but many remain nameless. Their stories lost and silenced and imposed by the state. Dr. Kimler's work is not just for forensic science, it's an act of resistance, a reclamation of memory, and a demand for justice, institutional cover-ups, and the ways that the state protects itself. When survivors began speaking out in 2000s, the state responded with denial and bureaucratic deflection. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement's 2010 investigation interviewed over 100 people, but opened no graves, found no staff culpable, and concluded there was no, quote, no tangible evidence of abuse. This is how the state protected itself, by controlling a narrative, by refusing to look, and by insisting that the problem is in the past. But the U.S. Department of Justice 2011 report found, quote, systemic, egregious, and dangerous practices exacerbated by a lack of accountability and controls, placing students at serious risk of avoidable harm and violation of their rights protected by the Constitution of the United States. The school was finally closed in 2011, not because the violence had ended, but because it could no longer be hidden. Survivors, now in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, have spent decades demanding recognition and accountability and reparations. And it's crazy to think that this place was only closed in 2011. If you think about it, think about where you were in your life in 2011. That was only a few short years ago. I know I was in middle school at that time, and think about what year, what grade you were in school, or just where you were. That was not long ago at all. So in 2017, fast forward, Florida lawmakers issued an apology. And it's disgusting to me that they think this would even be measurable with the apology. But again, that's white capitalist society. They deny, and then one year they decide, hey, let's give an apology even though it means nothing. Where's the reparations, right? So fortunately, some reparations did come in 2024. The state allocated $20 million for restitution to survivors. And I want to say that this is the bare minimum. They deserve so much more than $20 million. It's money that can never compensate them for the loss and needs to be up to even higher rates of reparations. Over 800 people have applied for restitution, detailing the mental, physical, and sexual abuse they suffered. Bryant Middleton, who was beaten 6 times for minor infractions, said, quote, "I would prefer to return to the jungles of Vietnam than to spend even a single day at the Florida School for Boys. This is the scale of the trauma inflicted by the carceral state." The violence that defined Dorsal didn't disappear. It just evolved into something grander. I would say that today's American public school system is built on many of the same foundations of surveillance, control, and racial attacks. Schools in Black and low-income neighborhoods resemble carceral institutions more than places of learning. Police roam the hallways, metal detectors greet students at the door, and punishment, not care, is the first response to trauma. This is not accidental, it's policy. Black children are still criminalized for survival, and in many school districts, they are suspended, expelled, or arrested at disproportionately higher rates than their white peers for the same exact behaviors. A 2021 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office found that Black students, particularly Black boys, are overrepresented in every category of school discipline, from suspensions to referrals to law enforcement. And this is not about bad behavior. It's about a system that sees Black childhood as a threat. Consider the school-to-prison pipeline, a process where children, especially Black, Indigenous, and disabled children, are pushed out of the schools and funneled into jails. In states like Florida and Texas, children as young as 6 have been handcuffed and arrested for throwing tantrums or even talking back. Black girls often face adultification bias, which means that we are punished more harshly because teachers view us as older or less innocent and more disruptive. Meanwhile, Native students are criminalized for speaking their language or wearing traditional garb and hairstyles. These aren't isolated incidents. They're the modern echoes of Dozier School for Boys. Education in America still serves white supremacy, not by whipping children in basements, but by labeling them as, quote, problem students, denying them resources and feeding them into systems of punishment, labor, and death. The tools have changed. The logic has not. Dozier is not an artifact of the past. It is a mirror held up to the present. Today, Black children are still criminalized, still over-policed, still funneled into juvenile detention centers for poverty-related offenses, and schools remain sites of surveillance and punishment. Youth prisons still operate under euphemisms like treatment and correction, but their function is the exact same. And just like at Dozier, white power maintains its grip. The same carceral logic reappears in today's foster care systems, ICE detention centers, and police encounters that end in death. Black and brown children still go missing in custody, and white institutions still delay accountability. And the brutality seems to be less hidden now. To end the cycle, we cannot merely reform. We must abolish a system that made Dozier possible. Abolition means dismantling prisons, youth detention centers, racist school systems, and the entire edifice of white carceral control. It means reinvesting in Black communities, honoring survival testimony, and building a world where care replaces cages. Dozier is not just a cautionary tale, it's a call to action. But the graves there are not only markers of death, they are reminders of what this country chooses to hide and what they must never forget.